when I was growing up, I hated going door to door selling popcorn for the Boy Scouts. Just the profit margin on this popcorn was ridiculous. I always felt like I was ripping off my neighbors and taking advantage of their generosity. But there was one neighbor, Mrs. Smith, who was always so gracious and encouraging to me and my brothers when we went around selling this popcorn. And in general, she's just a very kind lady. Whenever I see her nowadays, she always tells me how she really enjoyed watching my siblings and I grow up, how it was just a joy for her to witness us. And now that my mother has become a grandmother, Mrs. Smith, she's given my mother many toys for the grandchildren to play with. And now Mrs. Smith, she has 2 grandsons who live about 100 yards away. And whenever there's nice weather like we've been having, they love to go outside and ride their bikes around the circle. They love to play with squirt guns. And so with what Mrs. Smith has told me about how she enjoyed watching my siblings and I grow up, I would think that she would always be with her grandchildren, enjoying them, rejoicing in their presence. But I've never seen Mrs. Smith together with her grandsons. And I always wondered, why is this sweet old lady, why is she never together with her grandsons? Well, the reason is because her other son married a woman who had been divorced. And her daughter-in-law, who has these grandsons, that's unacceptable to her. She looks at the gospel today and she says, your son has committed adultery by marrying this woman, and so you ought to cut her out of your life. And so, because Mrs. Smith is unwilling to cut her one son out of her life, she's unable to see her grandsons. And so I think of Mrs. Smith when I hear the gospel today. Jesus tells us, whoever divorces their spouse and marries another commits adultery against them. I think when Mrs. Smith hears this gospel, she must hear Jesus condemning the divorced woman that her one son has married. Her daughter-in-law, the woman who has brought so much joy and happiness to her son. I think she must also think of her other daughter-in-law, the one who has cut her off from her grandchildren. And so for Mrs. Smith, these words of Christ mean the same thing as you cannot see your grandchildren. And so these are terrible words, awful words for Mrs. Smith. And I think for most of us, we too can feel pain at Christ's words. So many of us love people who just haven't been able to make their marriage work. And many of us have felt the pain of these beautiful dreams we had on our wedding day just not working out when we came to the conclusion that we actually had to separate from our spouses. And so, how can these words of Christ be good news? Well, brothers and sisters, this prohibition against divorce is not at the heart of our gospel today. Rather, the heart of this day's gospel is God's desire that 2 should become 1. God desires that we might experience profound intimacy with another person, physically, mentally, emotionally. He desires that 2 hearts with their own distinct loves and dreams and sorrows, that these 2 hearts might be together as one, sharing in everything. And God desires that we let down our guards, that we let another know everything about us, our deepest hurts, our worst mistakes, and our loftiest aspirations. And God desires that this intimacy lasts not for a day, not for a month, not for a season, but for our entire lives. And I think that's such a beautiful hope. That's such an incredible desire, God's hope for us. And yet, we also have before us how tragic it is when God's dreams don't come to fruition in our lives. So the gospel today, it places divorce in front of us as one of the ways that God's hope for us is frustrated. But we have all experienced so many more frustrations in our lives. Instead of a parent's praise, a student's lack of studying, it leads to a bad grade and disappointing one's parents. Or instead of close relationships with our family, one's temper, it leads one to bridges being burned and family members not speaking to each other. Instead of one's child growing into a mature young adult, they suffer from an addiction. So many different failures, so many different ways that God's hopes can be frustrated in our lives. But whatever kind of failure we've experienced, and in whatever failure we have experienced, those aspirations which drove us forward, they become stumbling blocks to us. These hopes that were so sweet, they become bitter. And so we find ourselves before God, feeling like we've let ourselves down, and then also feeling like we've let God down. And so, what does he do? Does he turn his back on us? Does he send us away? No, because Christ has forbidden divorce, and Christ is married to us. Christ is the eternal bridegroom who seeks us out despite our weaknesses and failings. The Eucharist that we have consumed today, it is the wedding feast of the Lamb, where the bridegroom offers himself as food. We have eaten his body, and we have become one flesh with Jesus Christ. Yes, God desires us to have fruitful marriages that last a lifetime. He wants us to succeed in our endeavors, to make our parents proud. He wants us to raise virtuous children. He wants us to be loving in our interactions with others. But more than all that, God wants to be one flesh with each of us. He wants to share in every aspect of our lives, and he wants to share all of his life with us. That is the greatest desire of Jesus. And at every Mass, that desire can be fulfilled.